I'm just what's left over. That's what my cousin said last week, right before slamming the door in my face. It wasn't even a fight. I had just folded her laundry and placed it on her bed like I always do. She saw the pile, saw me standing there, and her face twisted. "Don't touch my stuff, thief," she snapped, and then that line came sharp and practiced. "You're not family, you're just what's left over." I didn't say anything. I don't anymore. The house was quiet after that. The TV buzzed in the living room. My uncle was asleep on the couch, mouth slightly open hand, wrapped around a bottle he'd never admit was his fourth. My aunt clattered in the kitchen, sighing loudly as she scrubbed the counter I had already cleaned. I stood in the hallway a while, not knowing where to go, then quietly picked up the beaded bracelet from my nightstand, the one my mom made before she died, and just held it. I don't know when I stopped crying. I think maybe around the age of 10. Now it's more like silence inside, a deep stretched silence. Not emptiness exactly, more like the absence of a place to belong. I wake up early, I sweep the floors, I take the bus to school, come home, cook dinner. I take up the smallest space I can. At dinner, no one talks to me unless something's missing. Where's the salt? Did you forget the rice again? I nod, I serve, I clean. There's never a thank you. But there's plenty of looks, the kind that remind you you're intruding, even if you've been there for years, even if you've stopped hoping that'll change. Tonight, my aunt prayed before the meal, thanking God for family and the gift of love. My name wasn't in that grace. Not that it ever is. I bowed my head anyway. After dinner, I scrubbed the plates in silence. The sounds of laughter drifted from the living room sitcom, laughter fake and bright. I caught my reflection in the window above the sink. I look like her people say. My mother. Same eyes, same cheekbones. Sometimes I pretend she's standing behind me watching proud. Other times I imagine her asking why I stay, why I let them treat me this way. I don't have an answer she'd like. But I haven't broken yet. Maybe that's something. Maybe that's enough. I was 6 when I first realized I wasn't wanted. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the smell of bleach still clung to the air cleaning day. My mom had only been gone 3 months, and I was still waiting for her to come back, not understanding that death was a door you couldn't open from this side. That afternoon, I was sitting on the floor with my backpack clutched to my chest, still zipped. I hadn't opened it since school let out. My aunt stood over me, arms crossed. "You're old enough to do chores," she said. "No one's going to pamper you here. We don't owe you anything." I didn't understand the word pamper. I only knew the sharpness in her voice. I looked up at her and said, "But I just got home." She pointed to the laundry basket. "Then get started." That was the first time. Later that evening, my cousin Madison came storming in. She looked at the folded clothes and kicked the basket over. "You touched my shirts," she hissed. "Those are mine. Don't act like this is your job." I bent down to pick them up. She slapped my hand away. "Don't touch my stuff. You're not family, you're just here." She said it like I was a shadow on her wall. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, careful not to make a sound. I remembered my mom's voice humming a lullaby in Spanish, her fingers combing through my hair. I still wore the beaded bracelet she gave me, plastic spheres in blue, green, and white. It was a little loose, like it expected me to grow into something. No one tucked me in. No one came to check on me. I was only 6. But I already knew this was not my home. I was living in borrowed space, held together by obligation and the appearance of charity. My aunt was praised at church for taking me in. So kind, they said. God will bless you. But when the doors closed and the world turned away, kindness vanished. I learned how to wash dishes standing on a stool, water too hot and gloves too big. I learned how to make dinner by watching quietly from the doorway, memorizing every movement. I learned not to speak unless asked. And when the sadness came, the heavy, breathless kind, I learned to swallow it whole, let it sink inside me like a stone in a pond. The bracelet stayed on my wrist even as everything else was taken or claimed. My backpack, my books, my space in the room. But the bracelet was mine. And my silence? That was mine too. I didn't speak back. I didn't yell or throw things. I think even then, I knew if I gave them my anger, they'd win. They'd say, "See, ungrateful." So I smiled when I had to. And when I couldn't, I turned away. My aunt used to say it like a joke. but there was no humor in her eyes. "You're lucky we even took you in." She said it in front of people with that soft laugh that made others nod and murmur how strong she was, how kind. After all she's been through, they'd say, like, I was a task God assigned her, like I was penance for something. They didn't know the truth. Not really. She only took me because the church ladies wouldn't stop whispering after my mom died, because turning me away would have made her look like a monster. My uncle said it outright once when he thought I was asleep. "It's all for show," he muttered. "That kid eats and breathes and doesn't bring in a dime. And now she's taking up space in Madison's room." That was the night I started eating less, quietly, half a sandwich instead of a full one, rice without the meat. I would pretend I was full smile and say, "No thank you," when offered seconds, though that was rare. They never hit me, not with hands. But there are things sharper than fists. Words mostly, looks, cold silences, dismissals that stack up like bricks until you're walled in and no one even sees you anymore. Madison, my cousin always made sure to remind me that I didn't belong. Every time I borrowed a pencil, every time I folded her socks or placed a cup in her cabinet, she'd twist her mouth and say, "Why are you always touching my stuff? Don't you have your own?" I did. I had one drawer, one shelf in the closet, one side of the bed we shared but never really shared. She slept with her back to me curled up like I was something contagious. I tried to be good, polite, invisible. I called my Aunt Ma'am because Aunt felt too soft. I memorized her moods, knew when to stay out of the kitchen, when not to ask questions. I spoke only when necessary, cleaned without being told. I smiled when guests were over. They called me sweet, obedient. Quiet little Maria. If they only knew how much I swallowed. Sometimes late at night I'd sit by the window and wonder if my mom would have come for me if she could. I used to believe she would, that maybe this was all temporary. But time teaches you otherwise. 1 year became 5, then 10. And suddenly, I was almost grown and nothing had changed. Except now I had a voice inside me, soft but steady, telling me I was more than what they saw. I didn't say it out loud, I never dared. But I started to believe it, just a little. I almost left once. It was around the time I turned 14. I had packed my school backpack with 2 t-shirts, my favorite pair of jeans, the small jar of peanut butter I kept hidden behind the flour in the pantry, and the bracelet, always the bracelet. I got as far as the front door. I stood there, hand on the knob, heart pounding like it wanted to burst through my ribs. It was just past midnight. Everyone was asleep. The street was silent, except for the occasional hum of a passing car. I don't know what stopped me. Maybe it was the thought of the church calling my aunt. Maybe it was the fear of what came after. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I couldn't leave, because deep down, I was still waiting for someone to ask me to stay. Not out of duty, not for appearances, but because they meant it. No one did, of course. I let go of the doorknob, walked back upstairs, unpacked my bag in silence. And I stayed, not because I was weak. People think silence is weakness. They don't know how much strength it takes not to scream when you want to swallow anger before it burns through your throat, to stand in the kitchen while your uncle complains about the food you made, while Madison rolls her eyes and your aunt wipes her hands and says, "Well, if you'd paid attention like a real daughter, maybe you'd get it right." They didn't know how hard it was to keep your voice steady when all you want to ask is, "What did I do wrong?" But I never asked, because there was one reason I stayed. One reason I kept doing the chores, kept folding Madison's clothes, even when she threw them back in my face. It was Emily. She was my little cousin, my aunt's second daughter, born when I was 10. And from the moment she learned to walk, she followed me everywhere. She was the only person in that house who smiled at me like I mattered. She'd tug at my sleeve and say, "Maria, can I help?" or "Maria, will you read to me?" She didn't call me weird names, didn't roll her eyes. She didn't know I didn't belong. Not yet. I stayed for her. I kept quiet for her. I didn't leave because I didn't want her growing up in that house thinking silence meant she didn't matter. I wanted her to see at least one person who loved her without conditions, who didn't use her for anything, who listened. Sometimes I'd hold her when she fell asleep and whisper stories about my mom, how she used to sing in the kitchen, how she smelled like vanilla and coffee. I told Emily those stories like they were bedtime fairy tales, even though they made my chest ache. She never saw me cry. And that more than anything is why I stayed. Not because I couldn't leave, but because someone small and kind made it worth staying just a little longer. Some wounds don't bleed, they just stay open. Like when your name is left off the Christmas gifts and no one notices, not even you at first. You just sit there on the edge of the couch, hands in your lap, pretending to admire the wrapping paper that's now littering the floor. I was 15. Madison had gotten a new phone case lip gloss concert tickets, all wrapped in sparkly bows. Emily was squealing over a plush unicorn that I'd secretly picked out when I tagged along on a grocery run. My aunt took the credit, of course. She even winked at me like we shared some private joke. But I didn't laugh. I didn't say anything. And when they asked me to take out the trash bags full of wrapping paper, I did it, without a word. That's how most days went. Quiet compliance, invisible hours. They never said thank you. But they noticed when I made mistakes. You forgot to defrost the chicken. This shirt isn't ironed right. Didn't I tell you not to touch the upstairs bathroom? The bathroom I cleaned every week. It didn't matter what I did. I was always slightly wrong, always slightly too much. Once my uncle handed me a $20 bill and said, "Go get groceries and make it stretch." I walked to the store in the heat, memorizing every price, calculating in my head. I came home with rice bread eggs and a dented can of beans. Madison saw the can and scoffed. "You're so cheap." And I just smiled. That smile, it became a habit, a shield, one that people either ignored or mistook for passiveness. But behind it was something solid, a will that refused to shatter. At school I was quiet, but did well. Teachers liked me. I stayed late to help in the library just to be in a room where no one yelled. I'd sit in the back, organize books, and breathe. Sometimes I wondered if anyone noticed the way I shrank into myself at home. If anyone saw that I never brought friends over, that I wore the same jacket for 3 winters straight. But no one asked, and maybe that hurt more than the cold. Even so, I never hated them. Not really. I felt anger sometimes, a heavy heat under my skin. But hate, no. It takes too much from you. Too much energy, too much space in your chest. Instead, I folded towels with neat corners. I walked Emily to the park when no one else would. I read poetry in secret and imagined I was somewhere else, someplace where people saw me for what I was not, what I lacked. That was the thing. I never wanted revenge. I didn't want to scream or throw it all back in their faces. I just wanted to be seen. Not pitied, not praised, just seen. I thought I was used to it. Used to the names, the silences, the way Madison looked through me like glass. Used to how my uncle never remembered my birthday, how my aunt only called me Maria when guests were over, otherwise it was her or you, like giving me a name in private cost too much. But I wasn't ready for what happened that Sunday. We were at church, sitting in the second row like always, all pressed together in stiff clothes and plastic smiles. My aunt liked to be seen near the front, closer to the pulpit, closer to praise. After the service, there was a gathering in the back hall. A kind woman named Mrs. Ortega asked who had made the peach cobbler. I had. But before I could open my mouth, my aunt smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Madison, help me." That wasn't true. Madison hadn't even been home that afternoon. I'd peeled the peaches mix, the dough stood over the oven, watching it rise and bubble. Mrs. Ortega smiled. "How lovely," she said. "You're raising such helpful girls." And just like that, it was gone. The work, the moment, the chance to be noticed. It shouldn't have mattered. It was just dessert. But that night, something in me cracked. I was washing dishes, hands deep in suds. My aunt came in and said, "Make sure you scrub the casserole dish, don't leave it like last time." I didn't look up. She paused behind me, then added, "You've been quiet lately. Don't start getting moody, this house doesn't have space for drama." I nodded, she left, and I cried. Not loudly, not with sobs. Just tears that slipped out uninvited while I scrubbed and rinsed and scrubbed again. The water was hot. The dishes clinked softly. The bracelet on my wrist caught the light and shimmered a flicker of something gentle in all that hardness. Afterward, I went to the shared room, lay on the floor instead of the bed, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry because of the cobbler, or the lie, or the way no one ever gave me credit. I cried because for a moment I believed that maybe I didn't deserve it anyway. That maybe they were right. That maybe being invisible was all I'd ever be. But somewhere inside, somewhere deep, I heard her voice again. My mother's voice, not loud, not even clear, just the way she used to say my name like it was something beautiful. Maria. She used to braid my hair while humming. She used to say, "You have your own kind of light. Don't let them blow it out." I clung to that. Not because it made the pain go away, but because it reminded me this wasn't all I was. I was tired, but I was still here, still holding the light. The day I lost the bracelet, something in me unraveled. It was a Wednesday, a nothing day really, no special dates, no particular memories. Just another afternoon of laundry school dishes. Emily had spilled juice on her shirt, and I was kneeling by the washing machine scrubbing the stain when I noticed my wrist felt bare. At first, I thought maybe it slipped off into my sleeve, but it wasn't there. Not in the laundry pile, not under the bed, not in the bathroom. I tore the room apart. Madison came in and stared. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. She watched me open drawer after drawer, digging through socks and old papers and notebooks. "You lose your little orphan bracelet or something?" That word, orphan. She spat it like gum that had lost its sweetness. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Later that night, I sat in the dark with my arms wrapped around my knees, eyes fixed on the floor. My bracelet, the last thing I had from my mom, was gone. It was cheap, just beads on a string. But it was hers. It had touched her hands. She made it the week before she got sick, telling me, "So you'll always have something from me even when I'm not close." And now it was gone. I don't know how long I sat there. I felt hollow, not angry, not even sad. Just like someone had erased the last proof that I'd ever belonged to anyone. That night, I didn't dream. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying not to breathe too loud in case Madison woke up and rolled her eyes again. I was afraid that if I let the grief come all the way through, it would shatter me into pieces too small to gather back. When morning came, the house was already alive with noise, my uncle yelling about the car keys, my aunt clattering pans in the kitchen. I stayed in bed a little longer. There was no rush to start a day that would only ask me to disappear again. Later, I checked every corner, under the stairs, inside couch cushions, even the trash. Nothing. No one asked what I was looking for. No one cared. I kept thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment I finally understand I have nothing left to hold on to. And for once, I didn't fight that thought, because something else came with it. Quiet, clear, cold but honest. The truth, I didn't have a home. Not really. I had a place to sleep, walls around me, food most days. But a home that takes more. That takes love, safety, recognition. None of that lived here. And with the bracelet gone, I couldn't pretend anymore. There was nothing tying me to this place now. Nothing, except the choice to stay or go. I left in the quiet. No bags, no suitcases, just my school backpack half full, some clothes, a toothbrush, a notebook I hadn't written in since I was 11, and a photo, faded at the edges. My mother, in a sunlit garden, smiling, one arm around me. I was maybe 5. We looked happy. It was enough. I waited until the house was still around 4 a.m., the time even silence forgets itself. Emily's bedroom door was cracked open. I stood in the hallway for a while, just listening to her soft breaths. She'd be okay. My aunt loved her in her own rigid way. She'd have clothes school, a future that didn't involve being told she was a burden every time she opened her mouth. I wanted to leave her a note, but I didn't know what to say that wouldn't ache. So I just whispered through the door, "You are loved. Remember that, okay?" Then I left. The porch light was off. The air was cool, gentle on my skin. I walked past the mailbox down the quiet sidewalk where I used to ride my bike before it mysteriously disappeared. The street looked different at this hour, like it didn't know me anymore. Or maybe it never had. Every step felt strange, not scary, just unfamiliar. I kept waiting for a voice to yell my name, for a door to open for someone to stop me. But the house stayed dark, no footsteps, no one came running. I reached the end of the block and didn't look back. Not once, because I knew if I turned around I might see the window to the room where I cried into the pillow night after night. I might hear the ghost of a voice saying, "You're lucky we even took you in." And I wasn't willing to carry that echo any farther. I took a bus. Used the last 20 in my school binder, the one I kept hidden behind homework and permission slips no one ever signed. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the house where I was too much and never enough. away from eyes that only saw obligation. I watched the sunrise through a scratched-up bus window, pink and gold bleeding into pale blue. It looked soft, like a beginning. Somewhere between towns, I touched my wrist out of habit. The bracelet was still gone, but for the first time I didn't panic. I just closed my eyes and held the photo in my lap. I imagined my mother's voice, warm, proud, humming something only we knew. And I whispered, "I'm not coming back. Not out of spite, not to make anyone hurt. Just because I finally understood. I deserve more than a place where I am tolerated. I deserve a place where I am loved, even if that place is just me sitting on this bus heading nowhere in particular but free. I live in a small studio now. Nothing fancy, just a room with cracked walls, a window that sticks, and a heater that wheezes when it works. The kind of place no one would look twice at. But it's mine. There's a mattress on the floor, a shelf I found near a thrift shop, a chipped mug I drink tea from every night. I picked out a lamp with a warm glow because I hated how cold the light felt back in that house. Too bright, too exposed. This one feels like dusk, like safety. Sometimes I sit by the window and just breathe. It took months to stop flinching at sudden noises, to stop holding my breath when someone stood too close. I still catch myself apologizing for things that aren't my fault, brushing against a stranger's coat, dropping a spoon. The words come out fast. Sorry, I didn't mean to, and then I remember I'm not there anymore. No one here is keeping score. No one is waiting for me to fail just to feel bigger. I work mornings at a bakery. The owners are kind older couple married 50 years, call me Mija, like it's second nature. They don't know the whole story, and they don't ask. They just smile when I show up early and say things like, "You've got steady hands," or "We're lucky you're with us." Words I used to crave. After work, I sometimes stop by the library. It's quiet, no chores waiting, no footsteps pacing behind me. I read whatever I want. I write in my notebook again, not about pain, but about noticing small things, a bird building a nest in the awning, a child laughing without fear, the sound of bread crackling as it cools. The first night I slept here, I cried, not because I missed them, but because I didn't. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost inside my own life. A letter came last week. The envelope was plain, addressed by hand. No return address. Inside was a single sheet-lined paper folded carefully. It was from Emily. Just a few lines. "I found your bracelet. It was under the bed. I wear it sometimes, but only when I miss you. I hope that's okay. I think you would have left even if you didn't lose it. I think you knew it was time. I miss you. I love you. I hope you're free now." I read it 3 times. Then I sat down, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry fully, not the quiet, hidden kind, but the kind that shakes you, the kind that makes space inside your chest again. She was right. I would have left anyway. Not out of bitterness, not to make them regret, but because I was always meant to be more than a shadow in someone else's house. I don't know what's next, but I know this: I am no longer waiting to be loved by people who only saw me as weight. I am light now, and I am enough.